So last week, we looked at the story of Jesus and three of the disciples are coming down from the Mount of Transfiguration. And you've got Peter, James, and John, and here they are. They're coming down the mountain. And as they're coming into the valley, they come into the valley of trouble, is what I call it. As they come into the valley, what we find that the rest of the disciples and the scribes are having a little bit of a debate. And Jesus comes up to them and says, "Hey, fellas, what's going on here?" And all of a sudden, there is a man who yells from the crowd, and he says, "Hey, Jesus, I came and I brought my boy to you. Your disciples couldn't do anything for him, and I brought him to you because I trust that you can do something for him." And, Jesus begins to ask, he said, what's wrong with him and what's happened? And it turns out that this boy who has had these convulsing seizures over and over and over again, we see that he falls upon the ground and he grinds his teeth and foam comes out of his mouth. It is a perilous and dangerous type of situation. When Jesus further asks for more information, we find out that a spirit is within the boy, and the spirit oftentimes has cast the boy into the water and has cast him into the fire. Multiple times, we are told, oftentimes this has happened. By the way, could you imagine that? Could you imagine if you had a child who was so afflicted that was cast into the fire multiple times? It's not once or twice, it's multiple times, and into the water. I mean, we are paranoid that anything would happen to our children, yet we see this poor child and this man who has been in the care of this child for years and years, and he's got to be in a desperate state. Matter of fact, he's so desperate, he's brought him to Jesus, the healer. And he says to Jesus, and I think much of what we see in the chapter, or at least in this particular section of last week's message, we see in Mark chapter 9, he says these words, but if you can do anything. And Jesus will take up those words, if you can. And what Jesus is going to show this man is that Jesus, yes, he can. Jesus has the ability to do something which the disciples could not do. Jesus has the ability, and we'll see it at the end of the section in verse 29, that Jesus has the ability to drive the demon away from this boy. The disciples couldn't do it, but Jesus can. If you can, oh yeah, Jesus can. So that's what was last week. That's what we looked at here. And think about this for a little bit. If you are one of the disciples and you're watching this and you realize Jesus has come down from the mountaintop, Jesus has immediately entered into ministry, Jesus immediately drives this demon from this child, you're like, wow, that's pretty significant. And you are thinking to yourself, as a disciple, that is a follower of Jesus, you're saying, you know what? I have hitched my wagon to the right rabbi. Yes, I have. I have found the one who can do incredible things. Now, there's all kinds of religious teachers out there. There's all kinds of fake messiahs out there. But this Jesus, he is the real deal. He is the one who can drive a demon out of somebody. And we've already seen Jesus do all kinds of other stuff. So in the disciples' minds, they're saying to themselves, we've got it right. We have picked the right guy to follow. We do that a little bit in today's world, by the way. We look for somebody else who is achieving, and we want to be part of their posse. I want to be along with this athlete, or I want to be along with this particular person, or I want to marry this particular girl, this guy, and everything's going to be right? You're asking too much of those people, by the way. I'm going to elect just the right candidate. Once again, you're asking too much. But with Jesus is able to expel the demon from the boy. And the disciples are saying, now we've picked the right one. And what Jesus is going to do is Jesus is going to take all of their expectations and he's going to turn them on their head. Jesus is going to say, the disciples think they're going this way, and Jesus is going to say, no, it's more this way, 180 degrees different. Jesus is going to take their cart and he's going to turn it upside down. Because everything that they're expecting to gain from Jesus is wrong. They're not understanding the role of Jesus yet. And how long had they been with them? For quite some time. Before we get too quick about dissing upon the disciples, we must remember that we ourselves oftentimes do that. We have to be careful with that. Come then, Mark chapter 9, and we're going to look at verses 30 through 32. And then we're going to finish up 33 through 37. So we see three different things this morning. We see, first of all, what we'll call the passion prediction. It's the passion prediction of Christ. Verse 30. They went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know. For he was teaching his disciples and saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise. But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him. So Jesus is giving, again, what we call here a passion prediction. Jesus is focusing in upon the 12. Now, because sometimes, why is it that Jesus was trying to stay away from the crowd? So he's doing so because he can develop the 12 disciples. But not only is he trying to develop the 12 disciples, he is trying to inform them of what is going to happen to him, because that is crucial. You see, Jesus is not going to be caught by surprise. Jesus, we'll find out later on, intentionally heads towards Jerusalem. Jesus sets his face like flint. He heads down towards Jerusalem. He knows he's going to die. But notice something. This is interesting to me as well. Jesus says he's going to be delivered into the hands of men. That means somebody else is going to have some control over him. They will kill him. And it also says, and after he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise. Listen, if you're a loon, if you're crazy, you might say, well, I'm going to go there and die, but nobody says that they're going to rise again. That's completely beyond their scope of comprehension. That's well beyond that which is normal, is what he's saying. But Jesus lets them know, this is what's going to happen to me. Now, keep in mind, this is important, because after Jesus does rise from the dead, the disciples get to look back on this and say, man, not only did he predict that he was going to die, but he predicted his resurrection. You know what? I don't know anybody who has predicted the resurrection and has been able to rise from the dead. Do you? Well, of course you don't. Of course you don't. This screams to the authority and the power of Jesus. So he says, okay, fellas, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. This is not the first time Jesus has told them this. If you go to chapter 9 and verse 9, we see that three of the disciples, Peter, James, and John, they're with Jesus. They're coming off the mountain. And as they're coming down, Jesus says these words. He charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. They're not getting it. They have no understanding of what Jesus is talking about. But scoot over to chapter 8 and verse 31. In chapter 8 and verse 31, the context is this. Jesus is asking them, who do people say that I am? And they were saying, well, some people say this and some people say that. And Peter says, but you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, right? That's the confession of Peter. Cool. He gets it correct. However, Jesus immediately begins to inform them that their understanding of the Messiah is different. Look at verse 31. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer. He must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Think about that for a moment. Peter has just told Jesus, you are the hope of all mankind. You are the Son of God. You are the Christ. You're it. And Peter immediately takes Jesus, after Jesus tells all of them that he's going to die, takes him aside and says, oh, Jesus, you got this one wrong. That's pretty audacious, right? To which Jesus says, hey, let me pull you before all the disciples, and let me tell you something, Peter, you're wrong. Isn't this fascinating? The disciples see Jesus, and they see him as glorious. Jesus immediately turns the cart over and says, but I'm going to die. And the disciples are freaking out about it. That can't happen, to which Jesus says, it will happen. It's the same thing as we come down to this section. The disciples have just seen Jesus, yes, he can. And now all of a sudden Jesus says, but I'm going to die. At this point, they don't want to even enter into a conversation with Jesus because they're scared. Jesus has already rebuked Peter, says, get behind me, Satan. If you get called Satan too many times by Jesus, that's bad. Okay? Write that down someplace in your Bible. When Jesus calls you Satan, that is bad, okay? Everybody on board with that? Good, all right, I'm glad you're, well, Pastor really preached it this morning. He got that one right. Okay, yeah, all right, good. What we look at when we consider these sections here, now there's three major what we call passion predictions in the book of Mark. Now we have the first one in 8:31. We see this other one here in Mark chapter 9 and verse 30. And then there's another one in Mark chapter 10 and verse 32. And all of these are where Jesus is explaining that he is going to die and that he is going to rise again from the dead. Now, passion. Let's talk about that word real quick. Remember, there was a movie that was put out by Mel Gibson a number of years. They called it The Passion of the Christ. And we, in common English, we think, oh, passion, that means the zeal or the glory or something like that, right? But we need to understand that the word passion is not being used in that sense. The word passion comes from the Latin verb to suffer. So understand that. So when you watch the Mel Gibson movie, for example, and it talks about the passion of the Christ, you could legitimately call it the suffering of Christ. Okay, that's what the word passion means in that particular sense. So we have the passion prediction. Jesus says, hey, I am going to be handed over to people. I will be out of, and they will have control over me. They will kill me, and then I will rise again. So that's pretty astounding stuff here. Now, the disciples, when they hear Jesus say something like this, they say, I thought Jesus is the one who can. He's the one who can do things. We thought he was the one who could take care of business. He's the one who can drive out the difficult type of demons. We thought Jesus is the Son of God. We had this view of the Messiah, and the Messiah would come in, he would drive the Romans out, he would take charge. You know what? And we're going to sit down in his cabinet. This is going to be awesome. And Jesus says, I'm going to die. I mean, their balloon has just been deflated, has it not? But it gets worse for the poor disciples. Don't you feel sorry for the disciples, don't you? At least a little bit. I feel sorry for the disciples. Verse 33. And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you discussing on the way? Yeah, old man is right. But they kept silent, for on the way they had they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. So Jesus says, hey, fellas, so what were you talking about on the way? You got all these guys, they're all looking at each other, and they're not looking at Jesus in the face. They're looking to the left, they're looking to the right, they're looking up, and they're looking down. They're looking at each other. No one's saying anything. Why? Because it's like a kid who's 5 years old and the parent says, hey, what are you doing? Right? I mean, that's what they're doing. Because these guys are scared. I mean, nobody wants to be called Satan again or anything like that. They're scared. And like, oh no, we've blown it. But look at what they're discussing. Look at what they're discussing. They're discussing who's the greatest. By the way, not including Jesus. Among the disciples, who's the greatest? Jesus had just told them, I'm going to be handed over to be killed. And you're wondering who gets to sit upon my cabinet, as if Jesus is some mere political. He's some mere political figure. They kept silent because they were arguing about who is the greatest. Folks, they have their ambitious hands in the messianic cookie jar, do they not? Listen, we struggle with this. 21st century and first century, we are still the same way. We still struggle with this. We still want to be the greatest, don't we not? Good grief, we look at Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all times, right? I'm the greatest. Donald Trump, I'm the greatest. Everybody's the greatest. Very rarely do we have somebody that says, I'm the most humble. What's that? Then they're not. Exactly right. I'm the most humblest. we have here with Mark. Mark is setting up here. He's a good theologian. He's setting up this great juxtaposition, setting into contrast. He's setting into contrast the humility of Jesus with the ambition of the disciples, and we see this complete disconnect. See, because as Christians, a Christian is to be a follower of Jesus, and we see that the followers of Jesus actually, in a sense, want to be ahead of Jesus. We oftentimes, in our contemporary world, want the best of both worlds. We want eternal life in Christ, and yet we will also want the things of this world. We want the opulence of this world, do we not? Folks, it is not about getting ahead in this world. It is about the service and the following of Jesus. That has to be our priority. And again, we struggle with that. You say, "Well, no, I don't struggle with that." Yes, you do. You'll have women. I'm a better mother. I'm a better wife. I'm a better executive. I'm more caring. Pastors, I'm a better preacher. I'm a better administrator. I'm more compassionate. I have a hard time, frankly, sitting in the... one of the reasons I preach a lot is because I don't like to listen to other preachers. Oh, I'm the worst person in the world in a pew or in a comfy chair. I am. Because I listen to somebody else say, I could probably handle that passage better. Yeah, one of these days I'll be a piece of charcoal. It's true. The lightning's going to come right through and just zap me. It's true. It's very, very difficult because I oftentimes like to think, oh, I could do that better. Ladies and gentlemen, we must stop the nonsense of piling up bodies that we can step upon and crow from the top of the heap and say, oh, look at me. That's garbage. That's garbage. But listen, that we struggle with that because, most of us, that's how we were raised. Cockle-doodle-doo. In Matthew chapter 6, part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has a section, it's like a threefold section, and he talks about the Pharisees who love to go into the nicest places, where people say, oh, look at him, that's a Pharisee, and that's a guy who needs to be recognized, and they have the best seats in the house. And he talks about the Pharisees who go out and they pray these big elaborate prayers, so everybody looks at him and says, oh, wow, he can really pray. Could you imagine having a competition about who prays best? Or when they go ahead and they give alms, they make sure that they pull out their pockets, if you will, and give all of the change out there. Make sure it goes clangety-clangety. So that everybody understands that they are a big bug. And they elevate themselves over other people. But ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, we can have the same heart of a Pharisee. We can do the very same thing. We can look down upon the Pharisees and do the same thing which they were doing. If we are to be a people who are ambitious and compete, let me ask, let me do it this way. Maybe compete against yourself or compete about an earlier version of yourself or be ambitious for more godliness, but certainly don't go ahead and compare yourself to others. And our tendency is to do that. And when we're doing that, we need to, 9 times out of 10 and maybe 99 times out of 100, we need to repent. And stop worrying about promoting ourselves. Christ talks of his passion, his suffering. And he doesn't talk about promoting. He does not. What are you guys talking about? Uh-oh. He's on to us, boys. Now Jesus comes and he says, let's talk about the priorities which you're to have. Passions, promotion, priorities. Your priorities are this. And he sat down and he called the 12 and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. If you want to be first, you have to be a servant of all. Could you imagine going to the University of Washington and going to their business school and they said, okay, now our lesson today is on humility and the service of others. Well, that's not how it's going to be. They're going to talk about getting ahead and charging forward and being aggressive, right? Some of you are saying, yeah, businessmen. They're aggressive and they're awful, right? Hold on a second. Before you begin to think bad about the businessmen, businessmen are bad, I'll step on them and I'll promote myself. Have you ever been involved in the arts community? I have a son who plays the violin. Do you know what artistic people do? They want to be the first violin. They want to go ahead and they want to sabotage the other people. They want to cut the little strings, you know. They want to bend somebody's bow because they want the place. Remember a number of years ago, I think most of you are older than this, remember that the United States of America had two very high-class female ice skaters. Remember that? Do you remember the names? Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding. And some of you are like, what are those names? Look it up. Okay, all right, I'm just telling you. Tanya Harding had two fellas get an iron bar and go after Nancy Kerrigan and smack her in the knee because they wanted to break her leg or disable her so that Tanya could have the lead, right? And Tanya was like, it wasn't me. Oh, yes, it was. It doesn't make any difference in what realm you're in. You can be in the artistic realm. You can be in the sports realm. You can be in the business realm. You could be in the caregiving realm. You can be in the education realm. I don't care what realm you're in. We tend to demote others and promote ourselves. And Jesus says that is not the priority. That is not the priority. That's not how it works. My followers, the people who call themselves Christians, the people who follow after me, are to be people who put themselves last and not put themselves first. Now, you might find yourself in a first place. You might find yourself in a position. But is it because you, by your ambition, have charged to the front? Or is it because God in His providential hand has put you there? Because God does use people. He does use His people and sometimes puts them in the front some places, and that's fine. But that's because God has orchestrated it, not you yourself. Again, we are far, far too interested in titles and our own self-importance. The disciples were. We want to serve on Jesus' cabinet, so we want to sit next to Him. And Jesus says, let's turn that card upside down. Let's go 180 degrees. You got it wrong, boys. Got it wrong. Hey, stay here in Mark, but turn also to Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5. Look at the values, if you will, kingdom values, if you will. Matthew chapter 5. Look at verses 3 through 11. We oftentimes call these the Beatitudes. I mean, what should you be like, right? It's kind of fun sometimes if you read it incorrectly. Let me read it incorrectly. Blessed are the rich, for theirs is all the world. Blessed are those who are super happy because they get even more. Blessed are those who are obnoxious, for they are the achievers. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for whatever they want. Right? I mean, if you read it incorrectly, that's what you'd have, but that's not what it says at all. Blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek or the humble, for they shall inherit the earth. It's the humble. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who persecute, or who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when others revile and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And by the way, Jesus could even add, and so they will persecute me. The disciples are looking at Jesus, and we see in that middle part of Mark, they said, Jesus, you're the one that can. You can drive the demon out. We want to attach ourselves to you because we're looking forward to power and position in this world, to which Jesus immediately turns over their model and says, that's not how it works. I'm going to be killed. Let me tell you about my passion, and let me show you a little bit about the power plays that you guys are making. Now let us go to the priorities, and the priorities are this. If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. That's tough because, again, we do not naturally put ourselves last. We don't. Verse 36, and he took a child. He says, you know what? You need another example. Not only am I going to tell you, but I'm going to show you. And he takes a child. He took the child and he put him in the midst of them. And taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. We look at that and say, wow, okay, that's pretty cool. Jesus takes a child and puts him before. Now, a few things. First of all, sometimes this passage here is confused with another passage. And people are saying, oh, we're supposed to be like a child. That's not what it says here. It says Jesus takes the child, puts it in between. We're not supposed to be like the child. That's not what it's saying. We're supposed to be like Jesus who receives the child. Okay? That's what he's saying. So we need to be like Jesus who receives the child. Okay, well, what does that mean? And why is that significant? It's significant because in the New Testament world, in the first century, children are nothing. Nothing. 21st century America, everything is for the children. You ask the politician, why do you build that nuclear bomb? For the children. Right? I mean, it's like a punchline. So why are we doing those new roads? Oh, because it's for the children, because then they can get to school and they're safer, yada, yada, yada. Okay? Because everything's for the children, right? Nothing is for the adults, it's all for the children. If there's an accident, they'll say 500 people were killed, including 2 children, right? Because that's a big deal in the 21st century. That's it. In the first century, that's not the case. Not the case at all. And why? Children were not as valued as much because children died often. If you had 10 children, you might lose 5, you might lose 6, you might lose all of them. Children were considered something which had potential, but something which oftentimes died. And so therefore, you didn't put your hopes and your dreams upon small children because it's very possible that you'll lose them. When we were in Africa, we first went there in 1996. So we're in the country of Niger. We're in Niamey, the capital city. And there we are, 1996. The government is overthrown while we were there. We were supposed to be there for a week. Because the government was overthrown, the airports were closed down, so we got a bonus week. So it's a good excuse if you miss some work as an employer to say that the country was overthrown and, get a week off. Okay. So here we are, we're stuck there, and because we're there for a little bit extra week, we did some things which we probably wouldn't have done otherwise, and one of the things which we did is that the mission had property upon the Niger River. And in the middle of the river, they had a place which was called Onion Island, because they grew onions there. And there was a worker who came from Onion Island, and he came over to the mission compound, and he did some work over there. And we were with the senior missionaries there. We're just the rookies. We don't know anything. We're just visiting, quite frankly. And they told us that there was an infant in distress on Onion Island. And so we got into the pirogue, a big, long boat. And, by the way, in the Niger River is full of hippopotami, by the way. The most dangerous animal in all of Africa. And we're going over the hippopotami. The little pirogue was leaking, but no big deal because they plugged the holes with plastic bags. Different world. Okay, anyway, that's a digression. Anyway, so here we are, we're going over to Onion Island, right? So we get all the way over there, and there's a child over there, there's a little girl, and she's lethargic. The mother is not there. And in their culture, a woman would not nurse a child which is not theirs. I don't know why that is, but that was in that particular culture, that was how it was. My wife is a registered nurse, and so my wife said, well, what can we do? And so we ended up working out a whole system so that bottles and formula could be taken back and forth, and so that this child could have some nutrition, right? When we came back and we were going to the different churches and told people what we would do, we even had a picture of this little girl, and this is something that, for an example of some things that my wife would do while she was there, right? We got back to the country after we'd raised support and we learned French and we came all the way back and we do this work. And here was the grandfather of the little girl. And we asked the question, what happened to the little girl? And he said, Abu. What does that mean? Abu is the Zerma sentence. 2 words. Abu. She died. Abu. Interestingly enough, when you turn out a light, Abu, it's as if a light is extinguished. It is a casual, it happens type of mentality. Abu. Now you look at that and say, boy, that seems really callous. I'm just here to tell you it's a different world. It's a world where you didn't expect your children to live. And because you didn't expect your children to live, the children were not important, frankly. They didn't have the value like they have here. You didn't put your hopes and your dreams upon them. You said, yeah, life is too tenuous. And so when Jesus takes a child and he brings the child to the middle, he says, whoever receives this nobody, this person of no value, he receives me. And the disciples, they must have, all of their circuits must be popping. That doesn't make any sense, Jesus. It makes sense to receive you. You're the rabbi, you're the great one. Rabbi means the great one, or my great one. You're the great one. You're the one that we receive. Child, do you know that one of the greatest things that you can do in church ministry is work in the nursery? I always hear from people that, oh, it's really hard to staff people for the nursery. Mind you, I preach so I don't have to work in the nursery. Okay. All right. It's hard to find people to staff them, but I want you to understand something. That is a great act of love because you're doing something. You're working with, if you will, the least of these. You are. You're doing something that other people might not necessarily want to do. They might not be gifted at it. But God bless you for the work what you're doing. You're not going to get anything from working in the nursery. Some of you work in children's ministries or have worked in children's ministries. God bless you for it. Do you know I still know the name Mrs. Dean? I don't know her first name because, her first name is Mrs. Mrs. Dean is with the Lord now, but she was my Sunday school teacher when I was in kindergarten. Oh, you remember you're a kindergarten Sunday school teacher? Yes, I do. That tells you the effect. It tells you the effect of the investment. Isn't that amazing? The amazing impact that a woman who is forgotten in a church basement can have. She doesn't receive the adulation of, oh, great message, Pastor. She doesn't get that. She gets forgotten in a basement, but she's serving the least of these. That's astounding. Mrs. Gustafson was my 3rd grade Sunday school teacher. I remember her, though, because I have a little bit of a materialistic reason for that. She told us that if we memorized our Bible verses, we would get one of those cool blue and white pens with the 4 colors, and they have the your little buttons on them. Some of you are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, look it up online. A 4-color pen with the little buttons on it is very cool. Okay, it was the MacBook Pro of my time. Okay, that's what it was. And if we memorized our verses, we could get one of those pens, and she'd spend $2 on us. I remember her though. What a beautiful thing. Because she's working with the least of these nobodies. We have, at First Baptist Church, we have a group of men who will go to the memory care center. Now, we did this before, obviously, the COVID stuff happened, so we haven't been able to do it because it's closed down to us. But when you go to an Alzheimer or memory care center, and you go there, people don't necessarily laugh at your jokes. They don't necessarily nod. They don't say amen too much. Half of them may very well be asleep. I find it honestly to be a hard ministry. I find it difficult. Because I like it when people interact and respond. You know, that makes sense. I know I'm communicating better. But you go there, and half the crowd is asleep, and the other half may or may not understand what you're saying. Those people in our society are the least of these. And yet Jesus calls us to minister to them. I don't get anything from that, Pastor. I get no adulation from that. I got no reaffirmation from that. Is that what it's about? Is it about your ambition? Is it about padding your resume, if you will? Or is it about ministering to people who need to be ministered to? He took a child and put him in the midst of them. Taking him in his arms, he said, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. Whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." You get Jesus, you get the Father, you get his approval. That's the priority of ministry. The priority of ministry is not so that people pat you on the back or you get to pat yourself on the back, but it's about service. Because remember, a Christian is a follower of Christ. And understand this, Jesus comes and they expect him to be the one who is going to be on the white charger and coming in town and defeating the Romans, and they're going to be serving on Jesus' cabinet. They're going to be his supporters. They're going to be his posse, right? But what Jesus is Jesus comes and he says, "I've got bigger things to do. And I have come in humiliation." The incarnation is in humiliation. He takes upon himself human nature. And he comes, why does he come? He comes to die. Because he knows he must take care of his sin issue first. With all of us, not with him. So he therefore comes as a servant, and he comes to, in the incarnation, he comes as a sacrifice first and foremost. And so Jesus is the price of our redemption. He is the one who reconciles us. But he is also the example. So as Jesus lived a life of service, so we also are to live a life of service. We can't say, "Oh yeah, Jesus, I'm going to follow you, but by the way, I'll be ahead of you as well." If you ever get discouraged in your ministry, may I just say this? There are no small ministries. It's nothing small. Well, I only do. Stop right there. Stop right there. What you consider small, God may very well consider incredibly great. You do not know the impact that you will have. You don't know how the impression which you will have. I just don't think it's that significant. In God's economy, it is. Whoever wants to be first needs to be last. Don't worry about your titles. Don't worry about your positions. Be willing to work in the basement without fame or glory. Do you know that the Apostle Paul wrote many of his letters in prison? A man who, at the time of his writing, perhaps thought, "Man, I'm pretty much lost here. I'm going to rot in this prison." But he didn't take that attitude. Instead, he said, "You know what? Well, thanks for making me have a captive audience." And he began to spread the word. We know in the book of Philippians, in Philippians chapter 1, Paul is talking to all of his guards. What a marvelous thing it is when we can take the things which we consider small and realize that these are great things in God's economy and God's kingdom. Jesus came to die for us, we bunch of lepers that we are. Jesus jumps into this world, taking upon himself a human nature, a great act of humiliation, the incarnation to the cross, and he does it to save us. Not only that, He lives a life as an example. It says, follow in my way. Not a life of self-promotion, but a life of passion, and a life which has the priorities, which serves the least of these. Understand that what you think is small has great dignity in God's eyes. There is no small ministry. There is no small ministry. There is no small ministry. Pastor, all I do is take care of my kids at home. What a great and beautiful ministry that is. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. Pastor, all I do is I give somebody a ride to church every once in a while. What a beautiful ministry. What a beautiful ministry. Understand that God has given you such a privilege to be used by Him in the small things. I truly believe that God rejoices not in the preacher who gives to the message to the 10,000. Yes, he may give. God may be happy with that. But I believe that God gives just as much praise and enthusiasm to the one who helps that child. Folks, let us not, once again, worry about the titles. Let us rejoice in the fact that we get to serve Him. Look for the small things. Look for the small things. If God puts you in charge of something which we consider big, praise God. But don't disdain the small thing. It is God's gift to you. I want to say thank you too much to First Baptist Church. You guys do an awful lot. A lot of you guys do a lot of small things, and those small things are great.